This is the new Speed Triple 1200 RS from Triumph. It rocks 180 horsepower and weighs 198 kilos. Now, if you're a Speed Triple fan, you'll know that that's 30 horsepower more than the last bike, and it's 10 kilos lighter. That's a serious jump up in performance. For my job today, I've got to see if all this extra power and performance has cost the Speed Triple any of its legendary character. Now, we've hired Landau Race Circuit for the day to really put the chassis to the test. From fast, sweeping, accelerating corners to heavy braking zones and technical bumpy sections, it's the perfect place to see if Triumph has managed to tame this 180 horsepower weapon of a bike. Can you believe they actually kicked us out? They actually stood on the start line and tapped their watch and said, "Bugger off, go home." And rightly so, to be fair. We have been at Landau Circuit all day. It's my first time here, actually. It's a lovely little local Welsh circuit, and in fact, it's the perfect place to test the new Triumph Speed Triple RS. This is the first time Triumph has produced a triple engine with quite this much horsepower. It's 180 odd horsepower. That's a big step on from previous bikes, and I was really keen to see whether now the motor was dominating the riding experience and it was all about speed and horsepower, and it had lost everything that was brilliant about the old Speed Triple RS, which was fun, chassis, handling, cornering, all the sort of good roady stuff. I did have faith in Triumph because historically they have always made brilliant handling bikes. It's always been a Triumph trait from the Meriden days through to the Hinckley era, and I'm happy to say this new Speed Triple RS keeps that trend going. The three-cylinder motor has been a Triumph hallmark for well over a decade in the new era, and it's something that Triumph are very proud of. Anything written about a Triumph always says, oh, three-cylinder character, howl, passion, evocative, blah, 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 blah. It's very cliched, but it's cliche for a reason. There's something about that motor. It's the noise, the spread of power, the way it delivers its power, and it's that mix of kind of all the nice bits of a V-twin with the sort of howl and scream of a four-cylinder. You know, all this stuff's been said a million times, but this motor is everything good about a triple, just turned up to 180 horsepower. So all the good bottom end, it's got more of that. The mid-range is phenomenal, and then you still get a rush at the top as you ride it up to the red line. That is absolutely addictive, but I want to make the point that although the engine is a huge part of the bike's character, it doesn't overrule everything else on the bike. I've ridden a few of these sort of hyper naked, super naked bikes now with upwards of 180 horsepower, and it's quite easy for that much power to completely dominate a bike's chassis, particularly in road bike form. I've not ridden the RS on road yet, but I have ridden it on this tight, Nadgery bumpy circuit with a really awkward bus stop chicane at the beginning, and the motor does not run rings around the chassis, and I love that. This chassis isn't the latest fancy pants electronic suspension adjustment, and I think it's all the better for it. Call me a bluff old traditionalist, but a really well sorted set of Öhlins wins over fiddly, super adjustable everything with electronics for me every day. I'm going to put my hand on my heart here and say that is one of the nicest feeling front ends on any road bike I've ridden for a long time, and that is a huge claim. There are other parts of the handling that aren't the best, but the feel and trust and confidence I had in the front end of this bike on a track with overbanding, patchy tarmac, it rains, we had damp, it blew my mind. And if you have a look at the tyre echoes that sentiment. It's actually worked the front tyre properly. It's used the surface of the tyre and ridden it hard. I can't stop going on about it. The front end of this bike gave me so much confidence. I just want to go out and do more laps, which is why they ended up kicking us out at tea time. And if you don't believe me, here's some gratuitous slow-mo shots to really hammer home the point. Front end, Speed Triple RS, beautiful. Now, I feel I've got to balance out all this gushing, superlative-filled nonsense with a few criticisms. In the really tight, slow stuff, the bike isn't the most nimble thing on earth compared to like a Supersport 600 or a truly nimble bike. For a hyper naked 1200cc bike, it is very nimble. But if you look in the grand scheme of all motorbikes, definitely a 600 in those slow corners is a little bit more quick to turn and a little bit more planted. So it ranks very highly. I'm going to say it's behind the KTM Duke 890R, but ahead of probably the KTM Super Duke 1290. There's my kind of balance for it. One other criticism I had, the electronics package. Now, I really like what they've done with it. They've kept the dash very small, it's minimalist. There's not 8,000 buttons over the controls, so it's quite intuitive to figure out all the controls, changing the rider modes. You can customize the rider mode, so you can have your own settings for traction control and ABS and what have you in there. Really like that. The actual using of it is good, but just every now and then it just takes a little bit long to boot up. I had a few funny warning messages. Now, that's not specific to Triumph. Everything I've ridden recently with the latest TFT Fancy Fandango setup has had that little squiffy heart attack at some point in the day, and it's just a little bit buggy. Triumph's not the worst on that, but it's still something that annoys me. I'd like a bike that stays in the mode I put it in, is quick to boot up, and I can jump on and go. I haven't got to wait 5 seconds while it does its fancy thing. Like I said, grumpy old man, moaning about technology. I'll be complaining that the internet's too fast next. The engine, like that. Suspension, good. Front end, I've waffled a bit about that. That combination, that confidence front end and that engine meant every time I got to an apex, I was where I wanted to be, and it was just a chance to unleash that new 1200cc motor and just ride a wave of torque out the corners in a way that you couldn't actually on some of the full-blown superbikes. To use the optimum bit of power on this, you can be a gear higher everywhere and it will just drive off the corner. If you're looking at a sort of full-blown 200 horsepower superbike, they tend to need a bit more revs to get the same feel out of them. That's kind of a anecdotal how it feels to me as a rider without doing any measurements, but this definitely feels like I can be lazier with the gear and still come off a corner like an absolute rocket. And where that will come into its own is when you're on the road cruising along and you see a gap for an overtake, the response from this thing will be while your mates are still tapping up and down the gears and figuring out what's going on. Which brings me to the next little thing about it, riding position. It's not a sports bike, it's not a touring bike, it's sort of a naked sports bike, and the riding position echoes that for me. It's actually really nice on track. If you wanted to make this more of a track bike, if you wanted to make a bit of a track special, I think the first thing you do would be to move the foot pegs back and up. They're the bit that feel more road biased than anything else. But realistically on the road, that setup is perfect for sporty road riding. 3 hours on the motorway, it's gonna suck. For 100, 150 mile road rides on nice roads, twisty lanes, that riding position is just in the sweet spot for me at 5'9" tall. Okay, I exaggerated, 5'8.5" tall. But I got high heels on Mercedes. As for a Supersport version of this, a Daytona 1200, I'd love nothing more than to see one of them from Triumph. I always give them a poke and an ask whenever I see any of the designers there or the product planning team. But the truth of the matter is, for 99% of people, this is all the track bike you need. The looks and the feel of a Supersport bike are a different thing, but actually on track, this thing's fantastic. What would be nice would be to take one of these, put clip-ons and rear sets on, and make like an awesome, super naked, wheelie track racing death machine. So can we have one of them, please, Triumph? I'm going to change the tune. We want this with clip-ons. Cheers. I really like it, I hope. I'm pretty sure I've got that across. For me, the engine's always the big story. It's the most powerful triple Triumph's made. They haven't lost the character, they haven't made it peaky. It does everything a good speed triple engine has always done, but it's got a slicker gearbox and a bit more power everywhere. You can't not be happy about that. What remains to be seen is just how well it performs on the road. This is a bumpy track, but it's not the road, so we need to now get out, get some proper road miles in, and see if what we've seen here today does translate to as awesome a road riding experience as it was on the track. And that is going to be a lot of fun. I can hear you. Something's missing. Where are the massive, stupid burnouts and jumps and you doing bad stuff on this bike, Chris? You may well ask. In all honesty, the Speed Triple's better than that. It is absolutely capable of doing burnouts till the tyre bursts off the rim. It wheelied itself around the track all day. It definitely is good at that. This bike is a much more composed and a much better handling bike than just doing burnouts and jumps and skids and wheelies would suggest. There are definitely better bikes for being an idiot and a hooligan on. This bike is better than that stuff. This bike is such a sublime chassis on track. I didn't want to taint it with skids and burnouts and wheelies, so I just did wheelies. I'm getting very grown up in my old age.